Ward Hall. Man.
What is it supposed to be?
1 to 6, and it's some historic. I can't think. Who is the
It's open.
Antebellum Greek Revival Mansion, deemed to be one of the finest houses of
There it
its
is.
kind in the nation. 12,000 square feet.
Man, look at that. Sun's kind
Summer home of Junius and Matilda Viley Ward. Don't know who you people are, but I'm sure we will find out.
of, yeah. Look at that old house.
Oh my gosh.
Man,
It needs renovations.
yes it
I'd
does.
say.
Yeah, it's all run down.
Old guy dressed up.
Yeah, is that guy dressed up like?
Probably after church they came, you
Yeah.
think?
Well, I didn't know if that or if he was a.
That is one old house.
Yeah. Well, it looks like the machine there. Looks like they're going to do some renovating or doing something.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
Probably dirty in the spring.
I guess it's.
Oh, they have rain barrel.
Even like this. The black thing.
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
Well, they got the lights on in there. I guess you can come downstairs.
We're a little early, huh?
That's all right. Be a little early if you want to. I was really early today. I forgot to change my clocks. I came
Yeah.
out here an hour ahead of time.
Yeah.
Well, let's go do it.
This is a guided tour?
Yes, it is, ma'am.
Thank you. Ward Hall.
Mr. Bryant does a great tour. He's a retired history professor, and admission is $10. Okay. All right.
Okay.
Then is it cash only? What, your cash? Cash.
If you
I
don't have
prefer
that
cash,
handy,
but we can wait.
Yeah, because
There'll be a lady
she's
coming.
Come on, Kath.
Friends? What?
Come on, sit down with me.
West Side or West?
Okay. Oh. Do not sit.
I think you kind of frightened her.
It's a nice afternoon, but it's cold in this old house.
They didn't live here in the wintertime. This was just the man's summer home. Are you finished with the talking? Okay. All right. If you all will come up this way with me, we'll get our tour started.
Man, look at these old floors here.
This is the largest Greek revival mansion in Kentucky. It covers 12,000 square feet. And like I said, it was only the summer house of the man who built it, Junius Ward. He was a native of Scott County, but he moved to Mississippi in 1825 and became a very successful cotton plantation owner. He became so successful that he invested in other things, banking, shipping. And by the 1850s, he was a multimillionaire, in fact, closer to a billionaire of today's money. And so his big house was in Washington County, Mississippi, and had over 40 rooms in it. And they said you could put Ward Hall inside of that house. But don't go looking for it. There's not a brick of it left standing.
Oh, really?
Because the year after Ward Hall was completed in 1857, their big house in Mississippi was washed away by the Mississippi River. Every
Oh,
brick of it
goodness.
gone.
Really?
And they never built another mansion down there. I don't think he had the heart to, because they lived in a log house that they had built in 1825 when they first moved from Kentucky to Mississippi. But in 1853, Junius Ward and his wife Matilda Viley Ward decided they wanted a little summer cottage back in Kentucky. This was their little summer cottage.
How did they get back and forth? I mean, back in that day.
You could go by river. You would go up the river. You could go up to Mississippi. Steamboats were invented that made that possible. You go up to Mississippi, then you would go on to the Ohio, and then from anywhere from Louisville on down, you could go by either rail so far and then by land. And so they did that every year. They would come up here from Mississippi the last week in May and stay till the last week in September, and then they'd go back for the winter. The people who lived here after the wars found out, like we did, can't heat this place very well.
No, it's the kind of area in here. Big tall ceilings and wide open spaces.
Ceilings on the first floor are 14 feet 3 inches tall.
Oh,
Why
jeez.
3 inches? I've never figured out, but I had a measure. But the house, and even the interior walls, are 3 bricks thick. There's no wood in these walls. They're solid brick, even on the interior walls. And some of the exterior walls are up to 5 bricks thick. And it was built like a fortress.
Man.
It really was. But I'll show you, we'll get started just a few moments out here, and then we'll come back in. Although I think it's warmer out here than it is in there. Now, Junius Ward, he was a very, very prosperous man, and he had that magic touch that anything he put his hand to, he could make a fortune out of. Like a lot of rich Kentuckians, he was in the thoroughbred business, and he won nearly every horse race he ever put a horse in. And my family did just the opposite. We lost everything we had. But anyway, Ward was even part owner of the great racehorse Lexington, one of the greatest thoroughbreds of all time.
Wow.
And he won, in today's money, literally millions of dollars in purses. And of course, when he set Lexington to stud, he made even more money out of that.
Right.
And so, but now this plantation covered 550 acres, number 1 wet land, but his big plantation was deep south of the top plantation. His main home was Kentucky Bend. He named it after his home state in Mississippi, and that covered 2,000 acres of delta land, and then that was some of the richest land around. But this is some of the richest land too. But he didn't even have to make money off of this place. This was his hobby farm. He only raised prize livestock on this. And this land had belonged to his grandfather, maternal grandfather, Colonel Robert Johnson, who was a Revolutionary War officer. And Johnson received about 5,000 acres of Kentucky land for his service. And so he wanted to build on this hill. And like most southern mansions, it faces north to get the cool summer breeze. Except in Kentucky, in January, you get the north wind out. 550.
550 acres. Is it still here intact, or they broke it?
No. The estate started being broken up by the 1880s, and what was left of the original land was 150 acres of number 1 rate land, and that stayed in a private family until 2004.
Yeah.
And then they decided to sell the property because it was more valuable to the real estate developers than anything else. And so the real estate developers, they were purchasing the land, and they were going to bulldoze this house down. And those of us who were historically minded in Georgetown found out about it, and we rattled every cage we could, and we finally backed them down. And we bought the mansion and 40 acres of land, the Ward Hall Preservation Organization, for over $1 million.
Wow.
And that's been paid off. And so now there's no indebtedness on the place. All the money we raise is for the restoration of the house,
Yeah.
which is in the process of being done right now.
Yeah.
So, like all these cookie cutter homes are
That
part
that
of
was all
the
Ward
real
Hall
estate
property,
develop-
yes,
Oh,
all of
that's
that
a shame.
was. Clear to Payne's Depot, which goes way, 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 way over that way. And it broke my heart when
Did they not have children?
They had children, but the direct line had kind of played out, and the brothers and sisters of the lines that were left were arguing with each other constantly over it, and so they
Typical
finally
families.
had to get rid of it. But yeah, it stayed a working farm until 2004.
Rain barrel.
standing all under fence, $30,000.
Oh, in 1945.
1945. In 2004, they sold it for $4 million.
Oh,
That thing-
35,000 and what year was it?
30,000 in 1945, and they sold it in 2004 for $4 million. And now the 40 acres that we own now is worth $11 million.
Oh, jeez.
The land through here sells by the inch.
By the inch.
It does. It
Yeah.
really does. It's the center of the bluegrass, and this is very valuable land. Unfortunately, it's valuable just to plant little houses on, though. You know, the farming is it's gone downhill a lot. But anyway, if you look out clear to the highway out there where the traffic's going, that was the extent of Junius Ward's front yard.
Oh, wow.
They had 20 acres of lawn around this mansion and 5 acres of formal gardens that was laid out by European gardeners. And there in the back is the only part that's left of the original, formal gardens. But I found the plans of them, and we can actually restore them. But it's going to take more than a couple of old people to take care of 5 acres. And so we are, like I say, in the process of restoration. That's why you come in the back and not the front here, because these steps have decayed. They're limestone, and limestone does not weather well.
No,
It
no.
really does not. But if you look out on the lawn, you see these big ball cypress trees out there.
Yeah.
They're not native here. They are in western Kentucky, but Junius Ward brought those as seedlings from Mississippi and planted them in 1857. And they've been
Really?
still there.
1857?
Those 1, 2, and 3 there, those are ball cypresses from
No.
Mississippi.
We've been here for
Right.
160.
60-some years.
Oh, my
Man.
Yeah, on this hill where there's a lot of storms hit up there. But
Wow.
But anyway, there was also a circular driveway that used to be, and you can kind of see the outline of it.
Yeah.
And we plan to restore that also. And these big columns out here are 27 feet tall. They're solid brick. Even the
Really?
bricks were baked to make these flutes. And and the bases and the capitals are cast iron.
Man.
So,
That's amazing.
yes, they just knock it down. I've seen so many mansions knocked down right here in the
Oh,
this area
jeez.
through the years. And the stonework here, we're stripping that. The Wards never originally painted this stone, and other families later did that, so we're stripping it down. This is Kentucky River marble, it's called, and the old state capitol in Frankfurt's built of that. Geologically, it's about 4 million years old, but it takes a fine polish, and so they had all the windows and doors surrounded with that. And the Wards were so ostentatious, and that's the only word I can use. They even had a doorbell put in a country home, and you wouldn't have to have a doorbell in a
No, no. Who's gonna come ringing?
They put one there, and but all the bricks were burned here on the place, and all the mortar that's in between those bricks is the original 1857
Really?
mortar. A freed slave by the name of James Bailey from New Orleans was the one who laid those bricks, and he was a master mason. He really was.
Man.
Well, and to build it this high when you used to not have any,
Well, how many people did it take to build this and how long?
It took a small army for 4 years, 4 solid years of building the house. And as I say, all the wood that's in the house was cut from trees here on the place, and the bricks were burnt from clay here on the place. But all of the other things, I mean, the fancy things about the capitals and the base, they had to be brought from foundries in Louisville and Cincinnati to here by rail,
Yeah.
and then by ox cart. And
Yeah.
all the stone that surrounds the house that it's sitting on was brought from a quarry in Bourbon County by ox cart.
Really?
They drove all the stone here from that.
Man.
But now, to kind of give you the background before we get back in the house and be even colder, the Wards did not get to enjoy this place very long. Because if you remember your American history, I said this was finished in 1857. April of 1861, the war between the states breaks
Oh,
out.
yes.
And Ward, of course, was a Confederate sympathizer, being a plantation owner from Mississippi. And most of Scott County here was very pro-Confederate. In 1861, there were about 1,000 young men of military age in this county. Over 900 joined the Confederacy. So he thought he would be very safe, and in 1861 he came up for the summer like he always did. He came up the last week in May, And Kentucky had declared its neutrality. We were going to have the best of both worlds. We're a southern state by culture. We were a slave state, of course, but we had such strong economic ties to the north. We did not want to mess that up, so we wanted the best of everything. But you can't stay neutral in a civil war, and so
No.
that broke
You can
down.
try it at first,
It
but
didn't work, and it broke down quickly. And Junius Ward's son, Junius Jr., joined the Confederate Army here in Kentucky. And when the Union forces occupied this area, they took over the court systems, and they indicted Junius Jr. for high treason and would have shot or hanged him if they could caught him. And so Ward decided to take his family back to Mississippi and set out the war. He left the estate in charge of his Irish overseer, William Moran, who had always taken care of the place for him. And Mr. Moran took care of this estate for the 4 years of the war, and nobody
really,
touched it.
nobody touched it.
One reason the Wards were very well connected on both sides of the fence. Junius Ward's uncle, Richard Mentor Johnson, was Vice President of the United States under Martin Van Buren, and so they didn't touch Ward Hall. But anyway, when Ward went back to Mississippi as a patriotic Southerner, he actually invested all of his millions in Confederate war bonds.
Oh boy.
And in 1865, they weren't worth the paper they were written on, and the Wards broke.
Oh.
And so
Oh,
he's
my
going to
gosh.
lose everything. He lost a lot of his estates in the deep south. He saved his Mississippi plant, his main plantation. He saved that, and he was wanting to save Ward Hall. And he came up here, and creditors now were demanding money, and of course the only money he had was Confederate money, and so he fought off the bankruptcy courts for 2 years, but in 1867 he lost, and they sold this place out from under him.
Oh.
They even auctioned off his furniture, the paintings, the china, the silver. He did have enough hard cash squirreled away that he bought all those personal items back, and we know where they are to this day. Now the house is filled with period pieces, but it's not their furniture. The furniture that was actually in Ward Hall is in Mississippi and Arkansas right now, and we're in negotiation with the family trying to get it back. And it looks like we might
Oh,
have some luck
wow.
in doing it too.
Wow,
That would
my
be very
goodness.
good.
What year did he pass away?
In the 1880s, about 1883.
Oh, he still lived quite a while.
Yeah, he lived. He
Wow.
was an older man, and he did not die poor. He was smart enough that he did recoup some of his money, but he never built another big house in Mississippi. He lived in that log house, which is still standing after all these years.
So he lived in a log house, bought the big plantation, had this, and then ended back up in the log house?
Yep. After his big house washed away, even before the war,
Wow.
he
Yeah.
just lived in that house.
That's
But-
crazy.
But anyway, when all's said and done, Ward, like I said, did not get to keep this place very long, but while he had it, this was the center of Kentucky hospitality. One grand ball after the other was held here, and if you had any connections, you got an invitation, and you'd kill for an invitation to Ward Hall
Yeah.
at that point in time. But it just didn't last long. Now, the other families that owned it, there were only 2 other very wealthy families that owned Ward Hall after Ward lost it. That was the Glass family and the Hamilton family. The Glass family bought it in the 1870s, and they renamed the estate Glaston, but nobody ever called it that. It was always Ward Hall. It must have irritated the Glasses terribly. And they even put the first indoor bathrooms in Scott County in this mansion.
Oh, wow.
3 indoor bathrooms.
What year is that?
In the late 1870s. That's pretty good for
Indoor
a
bathroom?
That was.
But
Yeah.
then they sold it to Colonel Milton Hamilton in 1886, and he lived here until 1903, and Colonel Hamilton renamed the place Hamilton Place, but nobody ever called it that. It was always Ward Hall. But he died very tragically here in 1903 at the age of 83. He was upstairs reading his weather almanac, and he was wandering through the rooms, and he got to a bedroom, and he decided to open a window to see if the weather was doing what his almanac said. He lost his balance and fell to his death.
Oh,
And
goodness.
he
Fell out of the window.
yes, 30 feet down onto a stone walkway. And
Ah.
he was 83 years old, and it was the middle of February. And if he didn't die instantly, he froze to death that night. His grandson found him the next morning.
Oh.
And but anyway, he's supposed to be our resident ghost. I've never seen him. I don't want to. But anyway, but after he died, Ward Hall, a lot of the land was sold off to other farmers, and only farmers started buying the property, basically just for the land. They didn't know what to do with this great big house.
Right.
Some of them tried to live in it. They found it very uncomfortable, and there was a family by the name of the Nathan Armstrong family. They bought it in 1905, and they lived here till 1927. And they had the largest amount of children that ever lived in this house. They had 12 children. This house was
12 children.
But then they lost it through financial reverses, and then the Great Depression hit. And in 1930, 9 different families owned Ward Hall. They didn't even move into it. They just bought it and sold it, bought it and sold it. And by the early 1940s, the farmer who had bought this property, he had turned this mansion into a barn. He was storing tobacco, hay, and potatoes in there.
Oh my God.
Can you imagine that?
In the 40s.
In the early 40s. And then in 1945, the Susong family from Tennessee, they bought it. And then they lived here until 1990. The last Susong member was a bachelor living in this big house. And he only lived in 2 rooms of it, and the rest of it was closed down. And he died of a heart attack one morning, and that ended the occupation, of Ward Hall. And the house stood empty for 14 years. The heirs didn't do anything with it. It just stood here. It decayed.
not good for a
decaying.
house, yeah.
And if it hadn't been built so well, it wouldn't have survived. But anyway, then of course we got it in 2004. But that's Ward Hall in a nutshell, how the history of it right there.
Man.
The house, by the way, folks, when it was finished in 1857, it cost $50,000 in gold, which in today's money is over $8 million for a summer
Man.
house. $8 million.
Yeah.
Well, now let's go back where it's nice and cold.
Original glass from 1857.
This is the main reception hall. It's 65 feet long and 14 feet wide. And the floors are ash wood that was cut from trees here, and all the door facings are walnut that was cut from trees here, and all the hardware on the first floor is Sheffield silver from England. So he spared no expense building this place.
No.
How come the door handles so low?
They were short people. They were much shorter than those days.
It is pretty low.
Look at
Look at
He
that.
was always thought to be a very tall man. He was 5'8". That's how tall he was. So the average American, Daniel Boone, was only 5'8". But the average American male in the 1850s would have been about 5'4", 5'6". That would have been it. And women barely ever broke 5 feet.
That's crazy. It's like the old Roman soldiers. They were
How did we
4'8".
growing then?
No, that is actually the electricity. When electricity was put in this house in 1918, they couldn't go through these walls. They're 3 bricks thick. So you had to go through the ceiling and the floors to get electricity in here. That's what actually turns on this light here.
Oh my God.
But yes, there was a bell system here too.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I would think it would have been like
You
a
have
bell.
to have that,
Yeah.
And here, this square grand piano still plays. It's a Steinway from 1881.
Man.
Played at her Christmas candlelight tour. And then that portrait of that very beautiful lady there, that is Sally Ward. She was the niece of the man who built this house, and she was considered one of the most beautiful women in America. She was born here in Scott County in 1827, and she died in Louisville, Kentucky in July of 1896. But in her lifetime, her beauty was so famous that everything she wore became an instant fashion for women. That lavender color became known as Sally Ward Lavender. That hairstyle became all the rage. That line of baby dolls was named after a yellow rose was bred in her honor called the Sally Ward Rose. A waltz was composed in her honor. Steamboats, race horses, everything was named after her. And she lived, when she was a little girl, she lived on East Main Street in Georgetown, the historic district. In fact, I lived next door to her house. And she was even so beautiful as a little girl, people remarked on her. And by the time she was a teenager, she was drop dead gorgeous. And her father, Robert Ward, Junius's brother, was even richer than Junius was. He moved his family to Louisville where he had commercial interests, and he built a massive 3-story townhouse in what is now downtown Louisville. Of course, it's gone now, but it was so big it had its own private zoo in it.
Oh my goodness.
And Sally was spoiled, as you can imagine. And when it was time for her to be educated, she was sent to a French finishing school in Philadelphia, where she learned to speak French like a native, and her beauty was just legendary. And so when she graduated, her parents were so pleased with her, they gave her a little graduation gift, the Grand Tour of Europe. And when she started traveling, the press started following her around like a celebrity because she was so strikingly beautiful. And by the time she got to England, the British press went wild over her and wrote so much about the Kentucky Belle, the Kentucky Rose, the Kentucky Beauty, that Queen Victoria demanded to meet her, and she was presented at court to Queen Victoria. And later, when she crossed the channel to France, she was introduced to the Empress Eugenie of France, who was Napoleon III's wife. And Eugenie was supposed to be the most beautiful woman in Western Europe, and her portraits do attest that. When Eugenie met Sally, Eugenie could only utter one word: exquisite. And so Sally returns to American triumph, but her parents kind of burst her bubble. They say, "You've had your fun now. You've got to get married." And she didn't care anything about the local boys, and so she was attending the horse races with her family at Saratoga, New York. And at a ball, she met her first husband, and notice I did say first. He was Timothy Bigelow Lawrence of Boston, Massachusetts. His father, Abbott Lawrence, was the American ambassador to Great Britain, and the Lawrences owned half the textile mills in Massachusetts, and they were filthy rich. They court for about a year, and in December of 1848, they marry at her father's townhouse in Louisville. It was the largest wedding in Kentucky history. 3 governors attended her wedding. Sally invited over 600 of her closest friends, and nobody turned down the invitation. That does not count all the other people that were there.
Man.
Her wedding gown cost over $5,000 in 1848 money, which is over $200 and some thousand in today's money, and she only worked for that one wedding. And her mother gave her a wedding gift of 50 dresses designed in Paris, France, just for Sally, when most rich women had 6 dresses.
Yeah.
And she got 50 all at once. And so they moved to Boston, Massachusetts, and they did not live happily ever after. They found out they had only one thing in common, and that was money. And Sally was from the South. She was from a slave-holding family. Her in-laws were abolitionists, and they didn't like Sally at all. Sally was vivacious. She dressed very lavishly. She wouldn't even go shopping unless she wore $25,000 worth of diamonds. And so what really broke her plate with her mother-in-law was Sally was one of the first women in American society to wear makeup in public. Only prostitutes wore makeup in those days. And so mother-in-law didn't like that. At the head of the staircase, you could have heard the gasp of the audience to the Back Bay of Boston, and her mother-in-law fainted. Sally appeared dressed in white satin bloomers, bejeweled slippers, and a big ostrich feather in her hair, and this was 1849.
Just to tick her mother-in-law off?
Yes! And when her mother-in-law came to, she ordered Sally to get upstairs and get out of that garb. Well, Sally's not used to being ordered around, and she looked at her mother-in-law, she looked at the Boston elite, and she dropped every stitch of her clothes in front of the entire audience and slowly walked up the staircase. Her mother-in-law fainted again. And the next morning, Sally packed her trunks for Kentucky, left her husband, and divorced him, which was unheard of in those days.
Yes.
Millionaire west of the Allegheny Mountains. So they marry in a more subdued way. But Dr. Hunt gives Sally a wedding gift in cash in today's value of over $6 million to spend on whatever she wanted to.
Wow.
And then they move to New Orleans, where Sally becomes the queen of New Orleans society. They build a big mansion on the corner of Canal and Rampart Streets in the French Quarter.
And she could just play her French on all
Oh, she
of them.
did. And she would entertain her dinner guests by hiring the French Opera Orchestra.
Oh, my
And to
God.
announce dinner, there was a marble fountain in the courtyard, that would spray different colored waters to announce the meals. And one ball she gave down there became his fortune and his health, and they reunited, and the sheriff is after them for all the debts that had been accumulated.
By her.
By her. Dr. Hunt was in the Army during the time. But anyway, on a trip to Chicago, they were staying in a hotel, and Dr. Hunt grew despondent and jumped out the hotel window and committed suicide. And now Sally is penniless and the sheriff's after her. And so her beauty saves her again. She marries a third millionaire, Lorenzo Polizza Armstrong, who was a widower with grown children. And he'd made his fortune in the meatpacking business during the war. And I've seen that man's photograph. He was as homely as a mud fence. And he's married the most beautiful woman in America, and we all know why she married him.
Right, she needed help.
And he was so besotted with her that he disinherited his children and left Sally everything, and conveniently died 3 months after the marriage.
Oh my
And that
gosh.
started tongues wagging. And
I was going to say, they didn't have like
and now she's
foreigners for...
she's rich now.
No, I meant like
But
arsenic.
she's still not satisfied. She marries a fourth millionaire, Major Georgetown of Louisville, and he outlives her. He dies in 1908. Sally dies in July of 1896 in the old Galt House Hotel, where she kept very lavish apartments. And when she died, she was so important to the world of women's fashion. Her obituary was on the front page of the New York Times. That the great Southern belle, the great Southern
So
beauty,
she
died.
stayed popular?
She died at the age of 67, and they said she was still beautiful. And even that age, she died of a bleeding stomach ulcer, and they couldn't do anything for that in those days. And she took long enough in dying that she even designed her own coffin. It was lilac. And she was buried in Cave Hill Cemetery in Louisville under a big monument. And she had converted to Roman Catholicism. And even though she'd been through a very messy divorce, she had the biggest funeral mass in Kentucky history also.
Oh, jeez.
And when a young newspaper reporter from Duke, Kentucky, made the best quip about Sally after she died of that. His name was Irving Claw, who became very famous Kentucky author. He said very solemnly, "At last Sally Ward sleeps alone." And some literary critics, folks, think that Sally, was the inspiration for Scarlett O'Hara in Gone with the Wind.
Oh.
And
Man.
Sally came
That
all
could
the way
easily be.
from New Orleans in 1857 to open this house for her uncle. And she danced the first dance at the first ball here in 1857.
Wow.
Man,
Our little Sally.
that's quite a story.
What a life.
Now this is Junius Ward's study. It is a more simply decorated room because it's a man's office, but there are some interesting things in here. This is the oldest known picture of Ward Hall. That is from 1882. And you can see how little the ball cypress trees were in 1882. And all the land to the highway was laid out like an English park. And if you came up the hill, you crossed that little bridge right there. And then this big building that many people mistook for a church, it was so elaborate, was a Carpenter Gothic horse stable that was so elaborate that it had apartments in it for the people who took care of the horses, and even had an elevator in it.
I didn't know they were invented.
Oh, elevators were invented, and by the 1850s they were actually elevators. They were very dangerous, but they were.
Yeah.
And that, unfortunately, that building stood until 20 years ago when a freak heavy snowstorm caved it in. And we've kept the parts, and we're going to try to rebuild it as a welcome center eventually. So that's what we're doing. And this is the smokehouse, which is the building out back without the roof on it. And this was the overseer's house, which the ruins are still standing on the property here. And also in this room, if you will look over here, do you see this modest little house right here? That's where the Wards lived after their big mansion washed away. That's a log house covered with weatherboarding.
Little log house?
That's still standing.
Yeah.
And these are some of the oldest photographs of Ward Hall. That's 1889 with a big snow on the ground, and that's 1892 right there. And these are the original keys to Ward Hall right there. And also on that wall Those are genuine Confederate war bonds. They're not copies, but that's what destroyed Junius Ward's fortune. And you can tell you're in the middle of horse racing country. All the horse racing lines that are there. And I don't know, are you all into thoroughbred racing much?
No.
All thoroughbreds are descended from that one horse right there, the Darley Arabian.
Really?
And if you do not have that bloodline, I don't care how fast you are, you cannot be a thoroughbred. You have to have that bloodline. And that's
Old Confederate bonds, eh?
The world's most famous horse, Lexington.
Okay.
And if you'll notice also here, and here's a
Darley
portrait of
Arabian.
President Andrew Jackson, and it looks like somebody has kicked it. Probably a Kentuckian did. We didn't like it very much. And on the other side of the secretary is Kentucky's own Henry Clay. These two hated each other. They ran against each other for the presidency more than once. And when Jackson was on his deathbed, someone asked him, General Jackson, do you have any regrets in your long life? Now here's a man who had shot people in duels. He had hanged people. He was responsible for the death of thousands of American Indians. And he thought a moment and he said, I have two regrets. And they all, what are they? We want to know for posterity's sake. Jackson said, my first regret is I didn't hang John C. Calhoun of South Carolina. My second regret is I didn't shoot Henry Clay of Kentucky. That was his two only regrets. That was his only regrets on his deathbed. Very famous great-great-granddaughter. And I will tell you the man's name if you tell me his great-great-granddaughter. Everybody looks like... The man's name was Michelle Bouvier.
Oh,
Jacqueline Bouvier Kennedy Onassis was
right.
that was her
1850.
great-great-grandfather made this.
Her great-great
Wow.
Great-grandfather made that. A friend of mine gave this to Ward Hall. He was a collector, and then he just gave that to us, which was so nice of
that
him
is
to do.
nice.
And Nancy, and she never lived here, but she died in the 1850s, and she was a cousin to Henry Clay. And that's Colonel Hamilton, right after he became a widower with his children there.
She's pretty.
Yeah, a
She's
lot of
up.
people say, you know, always say, never say it's so sad to hear it.
Yeah.
Some say she's prettier than
Who's the man on the...
The man over there is the Dr. Reverend Potts. He was a Presbyterian minister.
Oh, okay.
He really, that's just really an ambiance portrait, to be honest with you. Over 400 years old.
Really?
Hand-carved wood covered with heavy gold leaf. They were carved by Alessandro Ruffini in Italy in the 1600s, and they were made for Lord Monson of England. There's Monson's coat of arms right there. And believe me, they weighed a ton. I don't put that. But you can see the wood where it's broken off there. All of this is hand-carved wood, not plaster.
They're identical.
They stand right in front of them and look right directly into them.
I had some mirrors like this one time.
They're infinity
Hand carved
mirrors.
just like this, gold leaf.
But look in there, you can see yourself going on and on and on and on and on and on and on.
Yeah. Look at that. Back and back and forth.
Oh, wow.
With the mirrors.
Look at how many mirrors you
Uh-huh.
can see by looking
Oh,
through.
I always tell people, if you see yourself at the end, that's good. If you see somebody else, get out of this house. Because I'm going to be ahead of you. Now, the sofas are historical. This one in particular, we were joking while I wrote them. This gentleman sat down on that, and I said, you can sit on that. But I said, you can't sit on that one. That belonged to Confederate General Jeb Stuart.
Oh,
and
really?
Robert E. Lee actually sat on that sofa.
Oh, wow.
Now take my picture, babe.
Yeah.
Don't put your feet up.
I'm gonna lay down. I gotta rest.
You know, even me, I'm the chairman here, and I'm here by myself and can do a lot. I wouldn't even
still
sit on
wouldn't,
that.
yeah.
Now, we'll start up here into this main drawing. Coming
Oh,
through. The only
it
heat we
feels
can
nice.
get.
All right. Heat.
Get in here.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is the main drawing room. That's a portrait of Junius Ward, the man who had
Okay.
the house built. This is his wife, Matilda Violet Ward. This is his brother Robert, Sally's daddy.
Okay.
And then this portrait is a cousin from Mississippi. This is Marybelle Johnson Blackbird Carson. They all married a lot, but that was actually painted in Mississippi in 1840, and the family gave us that, which gives me hope. You know,
Yes, they'll keep
Now, the furniture time period, we know the Wards had built their furniture. And so the mantelpieces are hand-carved Carrara marble from Italy. And this gasolier is solid silver. And gas was put in this house in the 1870s. There were no gas lines to Georgetown in the 80s. The Glass family built their own gas producing plant on this plantation. If you have enough money, you can do anything.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
And the pioneer portraits you see, that's Junius Ward's maternal grandparents, Colonel Robert Johnson and Jemima Suffolk Johnson. And the two portraits above and below her are his uncle Richard Mentor Johnson, the Vice President of the United States.
Wow.
You want to play us the tune, babe?
Oh, and we were talking about a bell system.
Yeah.
If you look over here, right on that chimney jam,
Oh, yeah.
if you turn that, it rings bells downstairs. So
Okay. I was wondering if
that's
you hear there'd be
yeah, there's the bell
service
system.
thing.
Oh, yeah. That big ceiling medallion, that's the original 1857 paint colors up there. And these panels on the around the windows here open, and interior shutters close these big windows.
Those open.
They open and the shutters come out of them.
Really?
And it was built.
That's built that way. And then
Look at these big doors, pocket doors.
12 feet tall, and you won't find a knot in that wood. They burn
12 feet tall.
trash,
Oh,
and they're lined in Sheffield silver.
oh my gosh.
Heavy.
Man.
Now, what would happen when everybody would meet? The gentlemen would stay in here, and they would have their bourbon and cigars, and they'd close these doors to the ladies. The ladies drawing. So they didn't want to hear untoward language. And that the ladies would have their tea in here, probably wasted bourbon.
Right.
Very musical. They play with any musical instrument. Do you know what that instrument is right there?
Not a piano?
Well, you have to be a little bit more specific than that.
Oh. I'm not musical.
That's a melodeon.
A
It
melodeon.
plays like a piano, but you have to pump it like an organ.
Oh.
These were very popular in the 1840s and 50s. Ladies liked them a lot. Then they fell out of fashion. But that's a melodeon right there. And then this big harp
Look at this.
is from England.
Looks like Capita stuff.
Yeah.
Man.
Everybody that passes the strings, it was just destroyed on the harp. And then ladies, you'd be wearing probably feel good today if you had all that on today. Ladies of the upper class, even in summer, could wear up to 20 pounds of clothes. In the winter, they could wear up to 40 pounds.
Oh.
Probably because they liked it in the winter. And this newspaper here is dated October 1861. That is not a copy. That's the original newspaper.
The original
Yeah.
newspaper from 1861?
But how does it not disintegrate?
Because old newsprint is made with high rag content paper. Modern newsprint is made with wood pulp. The sun hits it, it's gone. This can last 300 or 400 years.
Don't touch it.
Actually rag content paper.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. That's why it survives so well to this day. But look how small the print is.
Yeah.
Hey, you need your magnifying glass.
Something.
Of course, we have another silver gas clear here. But you don't know what this is right here. I'm going to play how this being heat point. That's a fire screen. It's a blessing.
A fire screen?
Yeah, you put, when ladies would sit here in front of the fire, you'd put that screen between you and the fire.
Okay.
Because these are beautiful these pale as death. They didn't even want their toast flush to the fire. And older ladies, when they began to wrinkle, would fill their wrinkles with beeswax and smooth it out. And if you sat too close to the fire, your face melted.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah.
Oh, they would. If you had a tan, that meant you
That
worked
was-
in the fields. No lady was ever going to fit that. They even went to the local drugstore and bought a little bottle of pills that helped them wonderfully to stay pale. It did work. It was arsenic. And
Oh.
some of them stayed permanently pale. They died from it.
Oh,
Yes.
jeez.
And they even had a diet pill in the 1850s that worked beautifully. You could eat a horse and not gain an ounce. The pill had the head of a live tapeworm in it. And you were fine until the tapeworm wanted out, and then you went into convulsions.
Oh, jeez.
What you do for fashion.
I was going to say, that's right.
This eternity here is 6 pounds of solid silver.
Wow.
And that old lady I wouldn't want to run into in a dark
No, no. I lost my glasses.
You go ahead. Those are actually 1850 reading glasses.
Really?
We really have a lot of nice
There's
things.
the lady's
Wow.
They loved everything on it.
Yeah.
Now here's another set of pocket doors with the silver
Look at that.
And this is and it's not simple.
Look at this, John.
This is how they got it.
Well, when you have servants, I guess you can get away with such a thing.
The china is French from the 1850s.
Oh, it's beautiful.
The crystal's even from the 1850s, and so's the silverware.
Wow.
And then that chandelier is original, and that was originally candles. But that was made by Cornelius and Baker in Philadelphia. He was the finest bronze caster in the country. And then it was turned into a gasolier, and then it was electrified in 1918.
Man.
Now, Ward was so rich, for this summer house, they had 6 sets of Limoges china made just for this house. And all the silver was from Tiffany's in New York. And look over here, this door, the only really safety mechanism is this little skeleton key, what's to hide whatever's behind it. This is a silver closet.
Oh, man.
And that is mid-1800s solid silver, not silver plate.
Solid silver. Man. And the
That punch bowl alone would be, if we could sell that, we could sell all the
man.
No, we can't sell it.
What a closet.
You just have that, and yeah, and that would not even held a third of what the Ward's under. And then the other door over here. This is to a dumbwaiter that goes down to the warming kitchen beneath this room.
Oh.
Now, Ward Hall had 2 kitchens. The actual cook kitchen was a separate building, but it's long gone now.
Right.
But the warming kitchen, the food would be brought there, and then originally slaves, later hired servants, would prepare the food on plates, send it up, and then there would be servants behind each chair as each course was served, and the dirty plates would be removed and sent down. The next course would become, and the Wards, an average dining experience would be 12 courses, and on banquets it'd be up to 16.
Oh.
And they would actually move all the furniture out of those 2 rooms and put long tables in here, and they had enough china and silver to do all of that.
Jeez.
That would take hours to eat.
Oh,
And if you had a servant behind each plate,
on some occasions you could set a table for 5 hours.
That was living.
That was living.
And these are reproductions of their desserts.
Yes. Do not eat them. They will not taste good.
The truffles? No. Look at that. Where's the turkey?
Yeah.
And they got actually, these are originals?
Yes, these are all.
Really?
Uh-huh. And then the portrait above the fireplace there is Anna Wiley Johnson and her little son Henry, and they were cousins to Junius Ward, and the family gave us that portrait. But anyway, little Henry has pride of place because he played here as a child in the summer when the Wards were up here for the summer. And when he grew up, he moved to Denver, Colorado, became a millionaire, and he wrote his memoirs. And he is the only eyewitness account of what the interior of this house looked like and what the gardens looked like around it. He actually described them all in great detail. And then that's his father, George Washington Johnson. And he was Kentucky's first Confederate governor. And he was killed at the Battle of Shiloh in April 1862.
But you're saying they were relatives
Yeah.
of Junius?
Junius Ward.
Because isn't his wife a Wiley?
Yeah, they're Riley and
So
Johnson.
they married their cousins? Very common back then.
That's my family.
Yeah,
was gonna say,
My grandmother wanted me to marry my first cousin. And I remember saying, why do you want me to do that? I said, she said, who better to marry?
Who better to
Who
marry?
better to marry? I mean, they were bad about that. If you like really pretty things,
Look at that. Ooh, gold.
24 karat gold.
Oh
A
my
place setting
gosh.
for 30.
Oh my
Place setting for
gosh.
30 in gold.
We'd never think of eating off
Made
of
in
it.
Bohemia in the 1800s.
Wow.
Man.
Now, is this from the family
No,
again?
that's not. Now we know
How'd you get your hands on all this stuff? Just
our
people-
board members are all from very old families.
Oh, and make donations,
Are
and that's
loaned to
nice.
us, yes,
Well, that's
And,
nice.
now,
Man. You want some soup, babe?
I'll explain to you. That is some of the original silver and china that was made for the Ward Hall there in that case there. And this staircase is a masterpiece of the house. It is a double elliptical staircase. There's lots of circular staircases, but there's only one other exactly like this in the United States, and that's at the Balfour House in Vicksburg, Mississippi. And when you get a chance, when they get clear out, I want you to stand in the well and look up,
Oh,
and you'll
it
see how
swirls
it's
around.
beautiful.
Oh, yeah.
It's beautiful. Sure. That goes all the way to the attic.
Look at that. Whoa.
And that's just some of the china and silver that was made. And this is the servants' staircase here. And this door would have always been closed. But there was a hard and fast rule at Ward Hall. No slave or later hired servant was to ever be seen on that staircase unless they were cleaning it. And they better not be cleaning it while anybody's using it. So they had to get up early in the morning or stay up late at night to clean the staircase. And when they went up to clean the bedrooms, they had to go up through there. Now, we'll go up to some bedchambers, and one of the things, ladies, especially when the gentlemen do for that matter, you would have to tip them to go up the staircase.
Oh, wow.
And you were always told, tip them to the wall. Don't
Yes,
tip them
don't
out.
tip them
Somebody might see your ankle the other way. Either I'm getting older and the cold is affecting me worse than it used to. I freeze to death anymore. Now, you're up another 65-foot long hallway, but this served two purposes. This was also the ballroom. This is where they danced. And
Just keep your arm going.
Here, and that's a softwood, and it does not make noise when you walk on it, and it did not tire the ladies' feet when they danced on it. And there would be a small orchestra at the end of the hall, and then you would have your ball here. And then this room over here was not originally a bedroom. This was the ladies' retiring parlor where they rested between dances. And I wish we could have seen what that room looked like before the 1940s. The Wards had an artist paint the walls with garlands of flowers, and the ceiling was blue sky and clouds. And in the 1940s, there was a sale of cheap white paint in Georgetown, and they painted all over it and painted all this varnished woodwork.
Oh my God.
This will be easy to fix, but I'm afraid the painting is lost. At least we have one photograph of what the garlands look like, so we could have it redone that way. And you see, no matter how rich the Wards were, there was no running water in this house, so your bathroom
No.
facilities are sitting out
Yeah,
there
those
on the
pots.
floor. The smaller pots are the chamber pots, the larger pots are the slop jars. That was for the overflow.
Oh, jeez.
Ew.
And it was the job of the
I'm glad I
youngest,
live now.
it was the job of the youngest servant that was capable of working to empty and clean those every morning.
Oh.
Now,
You don't think about all that, I think, when you're thinking of all this.
of all the beauty and stuff.
Yeah.
Now, here are the architectural drawings of Ward Hall, and this is the man who designed this house, Major Thomas Lewinsky.
Thomas Lewinsky.
And Ward Hall had a glass tower on top of it originally. The wind took it down many years ago, but we plan to put it back. That was part of the air conditioning system for this house.
Oh, very cool.
And then if you look over here out this window, you can see how massive those capitals are on top of the hall.
Man, he's lived to be 80 years old.
Yeah, those columns are being restored right now, and it's quite a job to do that, as you can imagine. And here, a lot of people will see this sign and they'll be too polite to ask about it, but we have it here for a reason. After the war was over, now the Emancipation Proclamation did not touch Kentucky. Slavery lasted in this state till December of 1865. And so when the slavery was over, if the former slaves wanted to stay with their former masters and work for them for a little of nothing, they were welcome to stay. But if they didn't, they wanted them out of the state. And so the railroad companies created a scheme, and for $5, which was a fortune for a freed slave or a poor person, you could get a rail line ticket to Nicodemus, Kansas. That town had been built for freed slaves. And anyway, they didn't tell you though, the rail line ticket only took you to the Kansas border and they dumped you. And you had to walk the rest of the way.
Oh,
But the
jeez.
reason we have the sign, half the population of present-day Nicodemus, Kansas, are descended from Ward Hall and Scott County slaves. So that's why we have the sign here. And now, the later families, like I told you, had lots of children. This represents its nursery. And of course, this seats being ballroom by that time. But you can see all the little thing. And that big half-teaster bed there was for the mother when she came to visit her children for about 20 minutes a day. And she'd get so frustrated she didn't want to
Oh, look at those little shoes.
Yeah, the little shoes and toys. And then over here in this bed chamber, this big 9-foot tall full-teaster bed is solid mahogany.
Wow.
And you can see the trundle
Oh,
bed
look
under
at
it.
that, yeah.
Now, in most homes, that would have been for a child to sleep on, but not here. That's for a slave to sleep on. You sometimes kept a slave in your bedroom in case you wanted anything in the middle of the night.
Really?
Yep. And so
they
you've
had
ever heard
ropes?
that expression, sleep tight, but that's where it came from.
Okay.
Because if you didn't tighten the ropes on your bed every so often, you fell on the floor.
I know, that's where that's
Never knew where that thing came from.
And this is a child's desk from the 1800s. And the door it's based on a sea captain's desk. And the doors open on both sides of it.
Oh, wow.
And you see,
That's
this is where you
neat.
kept your pens and pencils.
Oh, that
And
is
then
cute.
there it's got little drawers and
Yes.
Isn't there an inkwell?
They would keep that kind of thing up in here, but
Okay.
not, but your inkwell you generally have setting after this is closed.
Okay.
Didn't want an inkwell to not go wrong.
Right, right.
And this
That
is
she designed herself, you said.
and this is Ward Hall about 1950. It's- when it was still a working farm. And you can see the circular drive.
Oh, yeah.
And the stables were still standing.
Yeah.
And all this beautiful land back here is now subdivided.
Oh, that's a
It
shame.
is a shame. It is a shame. And then the bed chamber over here.
That's the girl.
This bedroom, this bed still has its bed frame. And cold winter's night like
That's
this,
nice.
this would be nice, but it's for privacy. Because there were always, except in the master bedroom, there was always more than one bed in the bedroom. And your bathroom facilities were sitting on the floor. So you didn't have much privacy. My ancestral home is still standing in Lexington. It's Waveland, and it was a 2,500 acre hemp plantation. And they were also in the horse racing business, and that's how they lost it. But anyway, my ancestor slept with bed curtains all year long because he had a slave sleep right at the foot of his bed every night.
Wow.
Well, it's kind of like you
never think of such things, and it's just the way it was.
Did you?
Yes, I did. And of course, I'm telling my age now too. But my mother, I always, I mean, I love my mother and everything like that, but she was the one who always disciplined me. And that's what I remember basically about her.
Sure.
But the one who took care of me was one I really liked.
Oh,
The way we put this, and you see why we do. If you started down that the wrong way, you wouldn't stop.
Yeah.
And this room, the reason we have those other rooms changed out, all that fancy plaster, those floors and constant vibration, so good for it, but there's no decoration under this one, that's why we can come in. Now this bedroom is away from everybody else. Do you know why?
Is it the master?
Nope. The master's the one below it. We've not seen that yet. This was the vagrants or travelers room. Every big mansion like this had a room set up, not for guests, but for travelers. There weren't hotels and places to stay in, and if you saw a big mansion like this, you would ask the owner if you could have shelter for the night.
really?
And Southern hospitality
Yeah.
dictated you could not turn them down, or you would fall in society's eyes.
Yeah.
But you did not know who they were.
Right.
So you
So
put them
they
away
were-
from the family,
Yeah.
and as soon as they'd go to bed, this door would be bolted and locked from the outside, and they would not be let out again until the next morning.
The vagrant. We went to some other place, Kath, you remember, that had the same thing, had a bedroom in the back for the vagrant ship travelers.
That's
Remember?
And this room is also interesting because that's the window Colonel Hamilton went out of.
Go to his death?
83 years old.
Yeah, I don't think he probably made it.
No.
I don't think he froze it off.
Oh,
I don't think
that's
so.
quite a fall down there. Oh, man.
How in the world? Oh, because he was leaning
Yeah.
on. I'm like, there's a big
We
ledge.
keep
How could he do
wondering
that?
how he did it,
Yeah.
but he probably kind of either sat down or was leaning over
And was trying
just
to lift
went.
him. Yeah.
Out.
Wow.
This spinning wheel should be in the servants' quarters down in the basement, but I couldn't put it there. The family who gave this to us, this is over 200 years old, and it was brought from Virginia through the Cumberland Gap into Kentucky during the pioneer days.
Oh, wow.
Man. Right.
They're not.
Yeah, I don't think they.
They are clothes presses. Look how little they are.
Clothes presses.
Oh my God.
Then they got so many of them in this house because they were rich and they were just showing off. Because you kept your well, they call it a clothes press because if you hung anything much in here and you shut the door, it pressed it up against the wall.
Oh!
There's one over there. Oh, man.
Do not have vertigo. When you get right here, look down, but be very careful. Now, no one lived up here. These two rooms were called trunk rooms, they're the storage rooms. And there's where the staircase was, and there's where the glass tower used to be. And you can see the staircase, picture what the staircase looked like.
Can't do the vertigo.
We put it down because it was getting very wobbly, and the public just refused to not try to climb it. And of course, our insurance wouldn't cover that kind of thing.
Sure.
And but if you look in these rooms, you can see how massively the house is built.
Oh, wow. So the servants, other than the ones that had to sleep in the bedrooms, they had.
The service quarters are in the basement.
Oh, in the basement.
They were playing choo-choo.
You know, I was looking at that too.
And golf, look.
And that big high back bed in there,
Yeah.
that belonged to Nathan Armstrong. He's the one who had all the children here in the 1920s. And his grandson gave us that bed. That bed was here over 100 years ago.
Man.
That photograph was taken in 1918. That younger man with the suit on there on this end or the other end. Yeah, he was getting ready to go off to World War I, and they didn't know whether he would come back. But the war was over before he even left America. So, and Ward Hall has two roofs on it, not just one. The original roof is slate, and there's some of the shingles right there. but for some reason water kept running back on the walls, and instead of just readjusting the slates, they built a superstructure above it. And here you can see this is the original roof line. Here's that roof that was built above it.
Oh my.
And there's a passage behind this wall, and you can get in between the two roofs, and I can stand upright. That's how
Really?
it's spaced. Mhm.
Wow.
Man.
That's when you have more money than you have sense.
Is there a hat in that box?
No, actually, the hat, I actually have it down there on the table in the
top
hallway.
hat, yeah.
Uh-huh.
But that's the box for it?
There's a box for it right there.
You mentioned that they had, what, 15 acres of lawn? This
No,
is
20 acres
20
of
acres
lawn,
of lawn.
and
How
5
did-
acres of formal
How did they
yard.
cut the grass?
Oh, people always ask that. They actually had a mower. It was horse-drawn,
Uh-huh.
and it was a cylinder, and it wouldn't cut, as fine as a mower would today, but it would look pretty good from a distance, and so that's how you cut the grass. You just put the horses there and pull this mower behind you, and then toward the highway, they would keep flocks of sheep,
Sheep?
and they would keep it cut down that way.
Yeah, I figured they'd use the natural goats or sheep.
Exactly. Okay.
All right.
Bronze lady there, they had ridden within a gas light, and they had drilled that hole for that. I wish they hadn't done that, but they
Yeah.
did.
To take the,
And all that was taken out, yeah. And you have to come over to this side. Know what that cabinet work is for up there.
how can you reach it?
Yeah, and it doesn't look like doors.
I'll tell you what the worst guess I ever had with that was, a choir loft.
Oh,
I said, for
jeez.
midgets.
Yeah. That is actually a cabinet
Is
up
it
there?
something that has to do with airflow
Nope.
or something like that?
It's a water tank. That was for one of the bathrooms that were put in here in the 1870s. It's lined in zinc, but they made a mistake when they designed it. There's no water coming from the roof into it. So when it went dry, servants had to take a ladder and take buckets of water.
Oh.
And then this door here has a name to it. This is the coffin or funeral door. Big houses had a side door to it. The one reason was there was a superstition in the old days that, you kept bodies at home mostly there.
Yeah.
And when you got ready to take them to the cemetery or the church for the funeral or whatever, you could not take them out the front door or the back door. If you took them out the front door, that invited the spirit to stay. If you took them out the back door, that insulted the spirit. So you're going to get in trouble both ways. So you had to have a side door. And if you were too poor to have a side door, you took them out the window.
Oh, goodness.
And to this day, folks, most funeral homes still take bodies out of a side door and
That's-
probably don't know why they do
That's
it.
right. That's true.
And that door looks wider.
Yeah.
I mean, the
For the
doors
coffin.
have all been pretty
Yeah.
wide.
But that's the coffin or funeral door. And now
Huh.
this room in here, which is now our gift shop, this was the master bedroom. The Wards were in late middle age when they built this house. They did not want to climb those stairs.
Right.
And it was cooler down here too.
Right.
Cold down. But you see they had a view of their gardens. You have the clothes presses on
yeah.
both sides of the fireplace here. And this is the room where that last person that lived in this house, this was his bedroom and his living room.
He boarded it up.
And the kitchen that was in the hall out there, that's the only 2 rooms he lived in this big house. And he died sitting right around that corner there in the kitchen one morning of a heart attack. And he was having his breakfast. And
boarded
he
everything up
wasn't
where
found
she
for 2 or
lived.
3 days. Luckily it was cold weather. And when the sister found him, he had supposedly had a cup of coffee in his hand. And she couldn't get it out of it, and so they called the ambulance, and they couldn't get it out of his hand either, and they couldn't get him out of the chair. So they picked up the chair, the coffee cup, and carried him to the ambulance. And I was telling that story one day to a group of people, and there was this gentleman that kept smiling. If you've ever done much public speaking, you can always tell if somebody thinks they know more than you do, or you're saying something that's wrong. And so I picked up on that very quickly. And after the tour was over, I asked him, I said, "Sir, you seem to be rather bemused at what I was saying. Did I say something wrong?" He said, "You're all so kind." question. I said, well, thank you, but that doesn't answer my question. But he said, I'm the nephew of the man who died here. And of course, I wanted to fall through the floor at that point.
Oh.
But I said, did I tell something in error? And he said, Uncle Nick died just the way you said he did. And everything was right, except he didn't have a cup of coffee in his hand. I said, oh. I said, no, he had a glass of cheap bourbon whiskey.
Bourbon, that fits Kentucky.
Yeah, I was holding something.
And I said, do you mind if I tell the coffee? And he said, no, go right ahead. But anyway,
Well, that's a neat.
that was. But all here, now this big sideboard here was actually left in this house when he bought it. This is a German piece from the 1880s. And then that big cabinet is from the Scott County Courthouse from the 1870s. Wow. But, okay. All right, now, folks, what we're going to do, if you all want to come back and look at the gift shop, you're more than welcome to. But let's finish our tour, and we'll take you into the basement on the outside. It's easier in those very steep stairs there. Oh, it feels good out here.
Yes, it does. My toes are like ice.
Oh, you will get in your car and turn the heater on.
Now
I
my
don't blame
husband
you.
driving.
I don't blame you. We may have just been toured outside.
Yeah, my toes are cold.
This is a smokehouse here. Now, it was rebuilt in the 20th century with those cinder blocks, but the bricks are old. And that ruins of that building down there, that was the overseer's house.
Okay.
And
Okay.
then, if you look over here, you'll see a white fence.
Yeah.
Down there. That's the slave cemetery.
Oh, really? Huh.
Oh, and that's the window turn.
Over. Ha 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 ha. That's quite a fall there.
Yeah, like I said, I don't think he froze
Well,
it
at least 2 people have died while they were here.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's right. The back.
I don't know. They just run around.
Be very careful right there with what you're
Step and step.
Mm-hmm. Now you're in a different world down here. This is how the other half lived. This is the world of the servants and slaves. But now you have to use your imagination a little bit. When this was new, this was fine. Most Kentuckians lived there. Plastered ceilings, walls, herringbone patterned brick floors, the view of gardens right out through there. And this room is the slaves' dining room. And with a Greek revival fireplace. And many people ask us, slaves wouldn't have had that fine stuff on their table, would they? And I said, as a historian, I'd say absolutely not, except at places like Ward Hall. The Wards would have thought that junk. They would have thought that not worth their.
They wouldn't have used it.
They wouldn't have used it, no, in the top. And look how thick these stone walls are down here. Hmm? This room here.
Probably took meals here at this level and had a sleeping bag here.
Here in summer, there'd be a blazing fire in that fireplace, and you washed your clothes in that big black kettle. And on rainy days, you would even hang the laundry here and let it dry. And those beautiful clothes like Sally Ward had on, you could never wash them. They'd fall apart. They were silk, satin, velvet. You only brushed them. And when they got so smelly, you tore the lining out and put a new lining in, and that was called freshening the garment. Some of those dresses would have stood up by themselves.
Oh, jeez.
And here's some of the original electricity that was put in this house.
Well, I would have all
Now we're
confused.
putting the warming kitchen, and there's the dumbwaiter that goes up to the dining room. And this big fireplace would have had a cast iron oven like that photograph right there. And that's how you keep the food warm and send it up to the dining room. And do you know what this is right here?
It's like a
A bathtub.
bathtub, yeah.
To wash the vegetables.
For
but
kids, I
don't
mean,
know.
for kids' bathtub.
That's carved out of a solid piece of yellow poplar. That is a dough board. You make bread dough in it.
Doughboy. Not a bathtub, a doughboy.
And
Make a
then,
big loaf of bread there.
do you know what this is?
Washing clothes.
Pasta maker.
I won $1 million. I always make a bet with myself on every tour I get. Somebody will say pasta maker. And I always say, there weren't many Italians in this country in the 1850s. That, folks, is a beaten biscuit maker. Have you ever had a beaten biscuit?
No.
That's a Virginia and Kentucky delicacy. And they're about this round and about that tall. And they have no leaven. The way you make them rise is to get air in them. And the reason they were called beaten biscuits, you would take a rolling pin and beat the fire out of them to get air in it. Then this was invented so you could put the layers over, get air in it, and then make them rise. Now, when they're fresh, they're wonderful. But you better eat them right out of the oven, because within 30 minutes, I could break that window out with one of them.
Oh,
They
jeez.
turn into
What's it
hardtack.
doing with your stomach?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And to this day, every time a Kentucky governor is inaugurated, a committee of the ladies of Frankfort always leave a plate of beaten biscuits and country ham on the governor's mansion's dining room table and a white cake. I don't know whether they're trying to assassinate him or what, but
I can't believe.
You know how there were wealthy people, obviously they're all enslaved.
But the since they only raised
17,
five
yeah.
livestock here, so they didn't need an army of slaves. But now there were 6 female house slaves that lived down here all year long and took care of the house and always kept it ready for the wards in case they just popped in. So,
Things were dusted no matter what.
no
huh?
matter what, and everything kept in total order. But you've got to keep remembering the difference in all of this. Now, at my background, I'm, as Ms. Finch said, I'm a retired history professor, and my background was antebellum Southern social intellectual history. And the slave issue, of course, is a very touchy issue, as you all know. And it's difficult in places like this sometimes to even talk of, but you have to really look at it in a very reasonable light, though. Nobody in their right mind would ever want to be a slave. Nobody would in their right mind.
Right.
But if you had to be, a place like this would have been the best
Oh,
place
yeah.
to be.
Right.
Because Ward was known for his kindness. He had a very
And that's what I was, I
he had a
guess
very
that's what I was
soft
trying
heart.
to get to.
And
was
even
the-
one of his Mississippi slaves, and if there's going to be bad slavery, it's going to be like Mississippi and places like that.
Right.
One of his Mississippi slaves was interviewed, former slaves, was interviewed in the 1930s. He was still alive by the WPA. And he could only say nice things about Junius Ward, Massa Junius, he called him. He said, you know, he used to go to Kentucky every summer. And he said, one year it was my birthday when they came back home. And he said, Master Junius brought me a pair of boots from Louisville, Kentucky that had brass toes in them. And he remembered that after all those years.
Well, didn't some slaves, when they were, after the emancipation, if they were given the opportunity from certain owners to now work for me, they
They did.
stayed.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that was-
I mean, to me, that's a big sign of how you were.
And they actually took the name of the
They did
owner.
many
Yeah.
times take the
Yeah.
name, and sometimes just to, you know, this is the sad part of all of this, you know. Slaves, no matter whether they were loved by the family or not, were still property. I mean, you
Yeah.
could buy and sell them, and just like cattle and everything like that. And when they married, there was no legality to their marriages whatsoever. Now, a good master would actually write their names down in the family Bible and say so-and-so married so-and-so on certain dates. But legally, after the war was over and slavery had ended, there was no legal standing. So a lot of these former slaves actually went to the courthouse of their respective counties and asked for a marriage certificate. And to this day, in all the southern states, the slave states, there are sets of books in the courthouses called the Black Books. And this is where all these marriages were recorded after the war was over. So you had to go through an entire process of coming from property to being a citizen, and that was a big leap. It
Oh,
really was
yeah.
a big leap.
And that's why they did the constitutional amendment saying if you were born here, you automatically became a
The
citizen.
13th Amendment is what ended slavery in Kentucky. Now, the Emancipation Proclamation didn't touch us because we were not in open rebellion to the government, even though we did have a Confederate state of Kentucky. There was still a federal government, too, in Kentucky. But now this is the overseer's office right here. And this is where Mr. Moran kept all the plantation accounts.
Was he here year round?
All year long, yeah. He never left this place.
Right.
And you know, to be an overseer, a white overseer on a plantation, was the lowest job a white man could have.
Really?
Yeah, you were neither thought of by the slaves nor the whites.
Really?
It was lucrative. You could make money out of it, but socially you were just zilch.
Isn't that funny?
And
Because you think of it now as the CPA.
No, they didn't look at it that way. But what happened after the war was over, Mr. Moran, he had saved enough money to buy him a nice farm, and he actually was later elected to the Kentucky legislature even. So he made a better life. Now, he was born in Ireland, though. And now this where you want your step right here. This is the wine cellar. And this building would have been shuttered off, and these walls would have been plastered, and there would have been shelving everywhere. And you see the hole in the wall over there? There's a stone that fits perfectly in that. That was their safe, where they put their jewelry when they came from Mississippi. And only the master and mistress kept the key to this room. Number one, it was full of alcohol. Number two, it had their jewelry in it. And but later families, after this ceased being a wine cellar, the Slater families knocked this window out and put a chute down here and made this a coal bin. And that's what knocked the plaster off the walls, and that's why the floor looks so black. But you get to see the stonework though. And a lot of people like this table right here. I don't.
Why in there? You don't like it?
It's the coffin table.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It looks like a coffin.
And after they would have the leaves, take the body away, the servants would bring it back down here, raise the leaves up on it, dust it off, and use it.
Oh, wow.
They were very
You know, is the brick wall, the stone wall, it's double thick? Meaning like if there was a stone to hide the safe, it's not just that's the end of the wall, because they couldn't.
No, it's double thick to hold up this big house.
Wow.
Oh, and one thing I'll ask, and maybe the ladies might know this too, but I'll ask the gentlemen. Don't mean to be sexist, but what is that contraption right there?
With that right there.
That hand move?
Yes, it does. Or did. It's rusted now. What is that? And I'll tell you what you're thinking. In the thousands of people who've been through Ward Hall since we opened in 2004, there's only been 10 people ever guess what that is.
It is, this moves back and
Yes,
it did it one
It's
time.
got a wheel on it.
Yes, there's a wheel on it. And I always would tell people, if you can't guess that, you have to stay at Ward Hall for all eternity. Populated if I help that.
It almost looks like a jack of some sort.
Does it have anything to do with the
No.
horse? No.
It looks like, you know, they would almost use it to jack or
I'm going
level
to
up
give
something.
Partial credit. And that'll save you. You won't have to stay here for all eternity. That is a jack. It's a buggy jack. It
Yeah.
changed the wheels on carriages and buggies.
Yeah. That's what it looks like. That's what it said. It looks like
Do
a
you know what
jack.
most people guess it to be? And I can't see this to say.
A washing machine. Something.
Nope. A guillotine.
Oh, jeez.
Ew.
I said, number one, where's the blade? Number two, who are we beheading here?
Yeah. It looks like with the handle and the
Yeah.
teeth, it looks like a jack. You
It
put it
does.
in and jack it up.
Very
Okay.
good, sir. Very good indeed. I'll count you 10 and a half.
Oh, good.
This little room is called the buttery, and that's just a small pantry. But over in here.
A buttery. Makes me hungry.
And that's that steep staircase.
That's where you put up slabs of butter on stuff, eh?
But here's the large pantry.
Now, what's in here?
This is this pantry. And if you see those drawers right there, you see that hole over there? A big wharf rat did that over 100 years ago.
A rat eating in to get to the
Oh yes.
bread?
They called them wharf rats. They were the
Oh, yeah.
size of small cats.
Right, right. Yeah, I've seen them.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
But all these interior windows, the architect put these in so light and air could circulate, which was a very smart thing to do. And do you know what that little box right there is?
Monster rat trap.
Rat trap.
What box?
That one right there, that little metal one right
A toaster. No.
Well, you know, I'll give you partial credit again, but no, it's not a toast. That's a foot warmer.
A foot warmer.
You
Okay.
put coals of
It looks
fire
like
in
it fire. Yeah,
No,
something with fire in it.
Use it
And
about now.
here at Ward Hall, we always, yes, we could use it all over ourselves right now. We always pride ourselves. This is one of the few historic houses that lets you see everything in the house. Most historic houses don't let you
Yeah.
do that. But we pride, except we don't show you what's in that room right there.
Oh, goodness.
And people always look at me like,
Was that the horse
"Wow,
carriage?
back there?" And I always say with a straight face, that's where we keep the people who didn't get the buggy jack. No, that was the bedroom for the house slaves.
Oh, yeah.
Dormitory room, and the reason we don't show it is when there was still water in this house, a pipe froze and burst, and the floor is dangerous right now. It will be opened eventually.
Oh.
It's the same size of the wine cellar, but
Oh,
that's why
really?
we don't show it. No,
And this is-
nobody's back there.
Yeah.
The original,
That's original.
all that,
All this was all done by hand. There
Oh,
are thousands
man.
of these in this
all
house.
the old houses we ever go to that got that same kind of.
And this
wood in it.
is the coffin or funeral door for the slaves.
Oh man.
And this is the only part of Ward Hall that has wallpaper in it. This was put in the late 1800s for the hired servants that were here. But by the 1920s, no one owned this place that could afford servants anymore, and this just became a cellar.
Oh.
Well,
And
folks,
this-
that was the formal tour, and we have
Very, very good.
That was the best tour we've had of
Must have been
houses.
a phenomenal professor. I
I wish
mean,
my students would have thought so.
I'm sure they did.
Some of them were very kind. I
You're
thought.
very enthusiastic and knowledgeable. That was very
Have you
good.
ever seen such a long broomstick?
It's a long broomstick. That's to get to the ceiling.
Exactly.
Yeah. See, I can guess these things. Good.
Before one time, she kept staring at that. She wouldn't leave it. And finally, I walked over to her and I said, "Young lady, what do you think of that broom?" And she shook her head and she said, "That's big enough for 3 witches to ride."
Oh, I love that.
Man.
Okay. Watch your step again.
Yes, thank you.
Here, get back in the sunlight.
Oh,
Thank you, folks, for coming by.
thank you very much. We really appreciate it.
that was the best tour I've had of an old house like that
thank
because
you.
're so full of knowledge of everything.
Thank you
You
very
were
much.
in the Vanderbilt
bringing
house
it to
too.
one.
You know, you ever been there?
Yes, I have.
Yeah.
More
This kind of reminded me of a little
That
bit.
is that really is not a house. That's a palace.
Well,
It's the
Back in the
largest.
day,
It's
too.
the largest. The Vanderbilt place, Biltmore, you're talking about. isn't
Yeah.
it?
Right, right.
That's
Yeah.
the largest private house in America. That is the largest. Of course, the Vanderbilt still own it.
Yes.
But of course they can't keep
They
it
had
up.
to-
They
they
had
had to
It's
let
us
like the
all
big
in.
castles in Europe. You have to open it to the public.
Yeah,
And,
exactly
that's
right.
right.
Yeah, it's a beautiful place, though, especially at Christmas.
Yeah.
This is a beautiful Christmas here.
Yeah.
You bring your hand warmer. Get this lady, get this lady into the heated car.
Thank you.
You can go either out that way through the subdivision, or you can go back down the hill, whichever way you want to go. That'll be fine.
Thank you.
Man, what a tour.
Oh, this is beautiful yard. Quite the tour. I mean, we thought it might be self-guided, but then,
Wow.
I bet we didn't even touch on half of what he probably knows.
oh yeah.
No, he's quite a
Very knowledgeable.
history professor, but just off the top of his head, knowing the details of everything, it just makes it so much better.
Sally Ward. Oh my God, that's so funny. This, I thought at that
Back in
point,
those
it's going to be
days.
from 1 until 6.
Oh, man.
Even move at all.
Well, I thoroughly enjoyed that. He was so entertaining.
Yeah,
He
he had
was,
more information than, wow. He had more facts than
Oh, I think so too.
just